Women of Wyoming Then and Now is brought to you by the Wyoming Historical Society and supported in part by a grant from the Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund, a program of the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. This program features unique female perspectives on events, themes, or narratives related to state history. We, the host, believe that one woman's action toward a better future can result in a greater legacy that inspires and equips many generations of women to come. Hello, I'm Janelle Molony, today's host of Women of Wyoming Then and Now. Joining me as a co-host today is Linda Fabian, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Historical Society. And with us today is our very special guest, Tempe Javitz. She is the granddaughter of Wyoming photographer Jessamine Spear Johnson, who has a very unique perspective on Wyoming life in the past through her unique female lens, if you get my joke.
Good morning, Janelle. Hi, Tempe. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Very excited to talk about the collections of your grandmother. I think that the book that you put together on her works is something that's going to just benefit every citizen in the state of Wyoming and beyond about the culture and the history of the state and what she saw through her eyes.
I would agree with that.
Agreed. So Tempe, can you give us a little background on finding Jessamine's work to be works of art?
That was easy. I grew up on a ranch in southeastern Montana, just down the road from my grandmother, Jessamine and Will's ranch that they lost in '32 in the Depression. And my father is her fifth child. And the ranch I grew up on, the walls were lined with Jessamine's photographs, as well as many other now famous male artists that were her friends. So as a kid, I knew about her, I knew her personally, and I had actually met some of the other artists like Hans Kleiber, who's an amazing artist from Sheridan. We also had always a calendar of Charlie Russell's prints hanging on the wall next to the phone. So there was art everywhere, and I thought my grandmother was famous, and I got disabused of that when I was about a teenager and started really asking questions. And my father said, no, she's been forgotten.
Oh.
So I was upset. I've always sort of been a very liberated woman. I grew up on a ranch and I worked alongside my brothers, and my father thought that was perfectly fine because that's what he and his sisters did. So I was very close with his oldest sister, Annabelle, and shortly after my grandmother passed, two things happened. 34 boxes of her photographs showed up in my parents' basement. My father volunteered to take care of the collection. And a few years later, my Aunt Annabelle handed me 27 of her diaries that had somehow escaped being thrown away. And that started the process. I was already living in California. I brought the diaries back. I started reading them. And this idea was percolating for years. FYI, I was an English major in college, and I wrote poetry since I was about 6. So I thought, well, I can do this. I can write a story. And so when I retired in 2007, I started on the story. But first, I had to work on the photographs because they were in boxes. They were in my brother's locked cabinet that was fireproof. And I thought most of those boxes would be photographs. It turns out most of them were negatives. So I had to buy a scanner and I had to start scanning. And in fact, it took 6.5 years to scan all those photos and sleeve them in archival sleeves and put them in some sort of order on my computer. A few years later, I actually tried to count them, and I have over 16,000 images on my computer. Wow. So that's how it started.
In those 16, you said 1,000 photographs?
Yes. Yes.
I cannot even imagine of the photographs you knew about and loved and adored and were memorable to you. You're unlocking an entire plethora of more that is unknown, and the potential is just incredible. And already right now, Tempe, I think what you've done to even just honor and validate her work is remarkable and impressive, and important for us to remind our viewers that saving those diaries and saving those photographs, even if you don't want it now, for the next generation, like your aunt held them and passed them to you, that's incredibly important. But can you tell us now something you've done about those photographs and diaries, something you've done with them that will actually make that positive impact on Wyoming in terms of history and now, especially for women?
Okay, so I started writing a book, and then of course I started. I had a manuscript, and I had pulled all kinds of stories from her diaries, and I had about a 150-page manuscript with photos, and I started sending it out, and I got a lot of rejections, and from major Western publishers. The good news is that of all things, a author who needed some photos, and the Penson family who lived right next to the battlefield had told him about me. He contacted me. We talked on the phone and via email. I sent him a couple of photos. They went into the book. He kept checking back in with me to see how things were going. And he said, I need you to contact this person at the South Dakota Historical Society Press. And I said, okay. And so I did. I sent my manuscript off to them, and that's the rest is history. They said yes, except that they came back and said, there's too much story here, and we think we can sell a photo book.
Mm-hmm. And they see the photography without even having so much story involved. The photography spoke so beautifully and so powerfully to them. Yes. I guess that's that old adage, a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yes,
but finally, someone saw how important Jessamine's work was.
Yes.
And Linda, have you seen Jessamine's photography?
Only recently I received Tempe's book in the mail, and I'll show you the book.
Mm-hmm. We'd love to see it. What's it called?
It is called Bighorn Visions, the photography of Jessamine Spear Johnson. And I felt, when I opened it, I felt much like the publisher must have felt, just seeing the photographs with just, you didn't even have to read the cut lines or the descriptions of what was going on. But what really struck me, Tempe, was how did you know the value? You must have an innate sense of what the value of those photographs were to you and your family. How were you able to express that to the publisher?
Well, that same grandmother gave me my first camera when I was 8 years old, and I've been taking pictures ever since. My minor in college was humanities, and we studied not just the origins of Western civilization, but we had lectures on art. And I fell in love with the information I was learning and could see how it applied to photography that I was so interested in myself. And of course, over time, especially when I saw the whole collection of my grandmother's and all the photos that kept showing up as I scanned them, I realized, and I found from her diary, she had no formal training. She did take some art classes after she married up at the Sheridan College, but and her mother had been very interested in art and had bought the first camera,
Right.
plate glass, those old plate glass cameras, and Jessamine as a child of 12 or 13 helped her mother develop those photos. And not long after, you could see that she started to zero in on her subjects, including portraits. just bringing it right up front. Of course, not always when you've got a big expanse of cattle and whatever, because she knew about it. Ellie Huffman had been taking photos for her father of the Spear Ranch Company. So she knew about the big photos, showing the large herds and the cowboys and that kind of thing. And how could she not? Well, she obviously did. She paid attention.
Were Bill Gallings and Hans Kleiber contemporary?
They were. I'd have to think about how long. Hans Kleiber was a very close friend of her brother, who we call Junior, my Uncle Junior. He was another Willis Junior. There's a whole string of Willis Spears. And he and Missy used to visit my aunt and uncle, whose ranch was right next to my parents, every Christmas. And so we would go down on Christmas Eve and there would be Hans Kleiber.
I think you've done a really good job elaborating on the passion that got you to take a closer look or a second look at Jessamine Spear Johnson's photography. And I think one of the treasures I find in your story is that shift you were saying that, yes, she could take those grandiose Montana big sky ranch photography, they're very stylized, very commercial, very common, but she also made an effort, it seems, to photograph the day-to-day, the women's work, if you will. She was able and willing to take pictures of women doing the ranch work, no matter what that meant, and elevate it from the day-to-day to something absolutely beautiful. In my opinion, she's not just a photographer. She's a good photographer.
And as my father told us when I was a little kid sitting at the dinner table, the men didn't want the women at the roundup. They would have to stop swearing. And then what if she fell off her horse? And what if the horse bucked? What? And I'm about 8 or 9, and I've been in the roundup since I was 4. I understood where my grandmother was coming from.
So Tempe, you come from a long line of very powerful women who knew their own mind and knew what they wanted to do. And how do you, if I can phrase this properly, how do you explain that strength that the women in your family had and knew themselves?
That's a good question. One of the quotes in my grandmother's diary, she talked about how her father, who was very busy with ranching and cattle, had told her to quit bothering the men and that she must learn how to saddle her own pony.
Yeah.
Right.
And there you go. Her mother was also a pioneer and was interested in photography and doing things other than just being a housewife.
So there was a whole family culture of acceptance and really celebrating who you are and what you love, no matter what you look like.
Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes we feel like what we're doing in our lives is small. It's just for us and us alone, and who cares? But the full impact of those actions is often realized much later in life. And I would say that's very true for Jessamine, that the full impact of her subject matter was not realized until recently. So why do you think it's important to point out or to acknowledge her women-centric photography now? I imagine back in the day, why are you taking pictures of women? Women don't do anything. Why are you taking a picture of the woman doing laundry? That's not, that's nothing. That's worth nothing. But now we acknowledge that's something.
Yes. What I noticed is all the other kind of photos. I mean, yes, there's photos of the cowboys, etc. There's photos of the cowgirls. There's photos of the kids. There's photos, they're living on the edge of the Crow and the Cheyenne reservations. All their summer pastures were leased from those families. So going back to 1897, there's a relationship in our families with the Crow and the Cheyenne, and she took photographs of them when they visited, of their families that came with them. But then there were events like the Cheyennes would have, you know, a rodeo down at Busby, and or over at Crow Agency, she'd go to Crow Fair. Over at Lodgegrass, they had rodeos. Her eye just turned around and she'd talk to the ladies and take pictures of the women and the girls standing at the fence, gazing through the fence at what was going on. And you get this totally great photo of a woman with her child, all excited, gazing through the fence at what's happening. And in their gorgeous costumes too, she'd catch that also. But she had that, what you'd have to say was that feminine approach, and she was able to approach the women in a way that most male photographers could not. There's photos inside the teepee, on the woman's side of the teepee.
Why is that significant? Can you elaborate on that? Why do you think Jessamine had access to these private moments with females?
Because those families were friends, and she treated it with great respect.
It sounds like she was sincere,
Very.
and the people that she met probably felt that and trusted her.
Yes, and yet she must have had a way of speaking with people, because even the cowboys, some of the photos of the cowboys are just, you can see the spirit of the person, you can see the laugh, you can see the personality coming through. And same thing with the different ladies that she took photos of. And there's a whole series of photos that are in a folder called People, and it's the locals, the local women who came to visit, and she took photos of weddings, and she took photos just girlfriends visiting, and they're really good.
Yeah. One of my favorite photographs in the book is on page 81 of a sheep herder, and you can just see his face, and you can feel the spirit of his work ethics. Yeah, I can't get it. I think his name was Bobby. And
Yes.
I think that that's the spirit that Jessamine was able to capture.
Oh, I love that photo.
Yeah. Her subjects, you could just see what they were feeling in that image that she took of them.
Yeah, yeah.
It was innocent and rare.
I agree. Not one subject is an object.
Exactly.
There's so much honor. There is distinguishment. So personal. I love it.
It's just so personal.
Yeah.
How do you hope that putting this book together and telling the story and bringing Jessamine back up to a place of recognition, how do you think that contribution should be, or how do you hope that it will be interpreted or realized in the future? Or in other words, what's that legacy that you want to leave with this work?
I think one of the things that I wanted to make her famous again. One of the first things I did over the next 2 or 3 years, I went from museum to museum hunting for her photos. And the Bighorn County Museum in Hardin they thought they had a few. They didn't realize that the ones that had her brand, J Spear J down in the corner, were her photos. But
so recognize her skill, recognize her name, recognize her hope and her intentions and her absolute beautiful art. Recognize her art.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I think we all want that for our family members. We want our history to be known and preserved correctly and with honor and dignity. And you are doing it through your book.
How many more books could you have published based on her photographs?
I don't know. We'll see.
Tempe, what was the age difference between Jessamine and her brother and sister?
Okay, so Jessamine, let's see, her 2 brothers, there's Uncle Phil and Uncle Junior, came right after her, and then her sister Elsa is 10 years younger.
Okay.
So they're all within, 2 or 3 years of each other.
If she's the oldest daughter,
She's the oldest daughter.
absolutely would have had expectations to be doing cooking, cleaning, and getting ready to be a wife. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yet she was outside with her camera.
Yeah, with her mom.
Yeah. Isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I think that's the apple doesn't fall too far story.
That's right. And there are times when she puts in her diary that her husband Will's complaining about all the time she's spending on her photographs. But part of the time that meant she was out there with him riding around and bringing the horses in or whatever. And then my Aunt Annabelle said to me, well, I had to learn how to cook and Phyllis had to learn how to clean because my mother was always out there, talking to the Indians about the leases and then going riding with our father. And there we were in the kitchen.
Oh, well.
And yet there's plenty of photos of them actually breaking horses. And there's a wonderful one of Annabelle branding a calf.
And all of this with what kind of a camera?
1908. She bought her first Brownie camera for $2.
Mm-hmm.
And then it went on from there. And in the front of some of the diaries, there's a list of the different cameras. She kept progressing. And I think it's 1926 or 27, she bought a panorama. And there's 2 huge boxes full of panoramas. And of course, the photos are sideways because the negatives are this big. And at one point, she bought a movie camera.
Oh, wow. Did you get to see any movies?
Way back when, and I think the movies are in my brother's lockup cabinet, and we haven't figured out if they can be, if they can be copied or not. Yellowstone National Park moved around 200 head of buffalo out of the Lamar Valley and into the Bighorn Canyon area for the Crow tribe, so that they would finally have buffalo back on their reservation. My grandfather and my two uncles and my father, and then 2 other ranchers, built these funny little rails onto their trucks, and they rounded up those buffalo and then put them on these trucks, and they spent it took them several months. They started in December of all things, moving them over into the reservation from the Lamar Valley of Yellowstone. And she had a movie camera at that point, and there is movies of this. There's photos as well.
Oh man, what a cool little snippet of history doing the buffalo migration, manual buffalo migration.
Yes.
Well, Tempe, now more than ever, we have so much access to materials, like if something's in the database at a historical society or at a university, we can see digital items of history and stories from the women who came before us. And thanks to your work, we can now see the story of Jessamine Spear Johnson, Wyoming and Montana photographer of the big sky. And unfortunately, if we don't do something about this, we don't do something to contribute, we don't do something to preserve those items, we actually run the risk of losing meaningful female representation. So in your opinion, in 1 or 2 thoughts, what would you say to encourage the next round of historians to get involved and make sure that those voices and faces and stories don't fade away?
Preserve the photos, the photo albums and the diaries. Don't throw them away. So, and if you're interested at all, you need to, go to your local library and dig around and find out what stories are already there that might be about your family. In Sheridan, there's that wonderful, at the library, there's the back room called the Wyoming room, and it's full of genealogy and diaries and stories, as well as books, about the local families in Sheridan and Bighorn. So there's stories there, I'll bet, that people today living in Sheridan don't know about their own families. Personally, I love belonging to the Montana and the Wyoming Historical Society, receiving their newsletters and you know, sometimes there's a Zoom meeting or there's a lecture and you find out more information about the area that you didn't know. And it informs, you know, who you are and what you feel about your past, where you're coming from.
People like you who understand the value of your own family history saved it and share it with us.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Right. Sometimes just the act of making it public is enough to spark the interest of other historians. And sometimes we don't realize that our little tiny story is actually filling in the blanks for others around us who went through similar experiences. And so by you making Jessamine appear, we can now pull on that thread and expand and have a greater conversation about women's work and the importance of making sure that women's work is credited properly, and all of those great points that you made earlier in our interview. Well, Tempe, do you have any final words before we say goodbye?
I want to thank you for interviewing me and putting more information out there about Jessamine and the family and the importance of, you know, digging through and finding things about your family and making sure they get passed on, if nothing else, that they get passed on to the next generation who may want to do something with them or not, but the family stories are important. They're very important.
Again, just the fact that you took the effort to tell us more about Jessamine Spear Johnson, and that you're going around and talking about her and the lives that you're touching by doing that will create a new historian among us.
Especially if they have any passion in arts or photography, and now we can blend or marry those passions to history. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's interview, but we are absolutely certain that there is much more to be learned about photographers in our past, and specifically about Jessamine Spear Johnson. So we do plan on providing some extra resources for viewers in the links below, and we would really appreciate it if you would check those out. We'll also include information about Tempe Javitz's book of the collection of photography from Jessamine and how to get that. Thank you again, Tempe. Thank you to Linda. Thank you to our viewers for watching Women of Wyoming Then and Now. We'll see you next time.